Hey, what's good guys? Welcome to the very first installment of The Daily Driver. So I threw out this idea over on Twitter quite a while ago, and a lot of you guys said, yes, go for it, we're excited, we're waiting for it. And basically what I aim to do is just give you guys my most accurate representation of what it's like to actually use this as your daily driver. So in this episode, we're obviously talking about the iPhone 7 Plus, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing that popped into my head with the iPhone 7 is it's pretty much the iPhone 6s. It's just a spec bump, just minimal upgrades here and there. It's not really the whole redesign that we're used to when we jump up to a new number. Mind you, that's really not even a bad thing. In fact, I believe this is the highest selling iPhone of all time, so it's not like the design really matters all that much. And plus, it looks like Apple will be saving their redesign for the next iPhone in 2017 because it's the 10th anniversary of iPhone. So with that aside, what is it like to actually use the iPhone 7 Plus? There's actually not a whole lot to say here. So starting off with the hardware, it's top notch. I mean, we'd pretty much expect that from Apple. The iPhone 7 Plus is super solid, it's very strong, and yeah, it's probably one of the best built phones out there right now. Although because of the material used on the back, it does get really slippery and it's really prone to scratches. So of course I went ahead and slapped a deep brand skin on mine. You gotta check out this marble. This one was pretty much just released a little while ago. It's a must have. I'll have a link for it in the description. But other than that, top of the line materials, you would expect nothing less from Apple. Now, one thing that did surprise me, but at the same time didn't surprise me, was that the fact that Apple is still using 1080p screens on their phones. In fact, the iPhone 7 Plus is the only one that has a 1080p display. The iPhone 7 has an even lower res display. Now at first, this is sort of a questionable move. Where's the 1440p? Where's the OLED? We need this in our displays. Apple, you're falling behind. But in all honesty, Apple usually does a great job with their displays, even if they're lower res than the rest of the competition out there. The panel on the iPhone 7 Plus, while it is a little odd to put a 1080p panel on a 5.5-inch display, it's not the best thing in the world, but at the same time, it's not the worst thing in the world. Number one, it saves on battery, and plus, this specific display, Apple has put a lot of effort into making it probably the most color accurate display on a smartphone. So for example, if you're watching one of my YouTube videos on an iPhone and you take a Galaxy device, for example, that has a very saturated AMOLED display, you're gonna notice a difference in color. And that's because Apple is really trying to give you guys the most accurate representation in terms of color in whatever you're viewing on the display. So it makes sense. And in all honesty, the Retina display is still very crisp and clean, but I have definitely been spoiled by 2K AMOLED. There's also the camera bump on the back of the phone, not the best looking thing in the world. If you're kind of using it on a table, it does rock very minimally, but you actually have to press it in order to get it to rock. So it's not a bad thing, it's just kind of odd looking. Then there's the overall size of the phone itself. Now again, like I said, it looks like Apple's going to be saving their refresh design for next year. So of course they're going to just keep the same overall design. They're not really going to decrease the size of the bezels that much. But then when you consider phones like the S7 Edge and the OnePlus 3, they both have 5.5-inch displays, and they don't feel nearly as big as the iPhone 7 Plus. It's not a bad thing, but again, it's still a really large phone. And now comes iOS itself. I still can't set default applications. You need to jailbreak in order to change pretty much anything. The control center, in my opinion, is under featured. And because I'm a customization freak, I like to change my wallpapers pretty much every day. A lot of people probably don't like to do that because their wallpapers are probably going to be a picture that they took with their phone. But for me personally, I like to change my wallpapers, and having a nice selection of wallpaper apps is nice. There are barely any really good ones on the App Store. But in all honesty, iOS is probably the fastest, it's the most fluid, it's the most supported, the most optimized OS out there. There's just no getting around that. And speaking of support, application support on iOS has always been and still is unmatched. As much as I hate to admit it, Google applications do work better on iPhones than they do on Android devices. Really sad when you think about it, but it's true. Applications are higher quality, they mostly work better, and they're just more polished over on the iOS side when compared to most of the applications found on the Google Play Store. And yes, we all know Snapchat is still better on iPhones than it is on Android. I still don't know why. There are other things that I like about iOS. We have Raise to Wake, which is not necessarily something new, but it does work well on the iPhone. And now you can hide applications from the home screen, so we don't have to have a folder loaded with applications that we just don't use. We can now finally clear all notifications, and that's one thing that I really still don't like about iOS. I mentioned this before, notifications are still kind of cheesy in that even when you go into Instagram, for example, and you see all of your notifications, you'll still have that notification in your notification shade. If you guys know what I'm talking about, still kind of annoying, so it doesn't really go away once you've read it. You actually have to tap on the actual notification itself, but you can now clear all notifications using 3D Touch. Thank you. And speaking of 3D Touch, it's nice that Apple is still finding new uses for it, but I still feel that it's underutilized and there are a lot more things that you can do with it, like in the control center, for example. It would be really nice to be able to manage Wi-Fi connections and Bluetooth connections straight from the control center. It's called the control center, but I can't really control much from it. It's more like a toggle center. And really all I use 3D Touch for is the Google application and clearing all notifications. So it is a nice feature to have, but it's just not something that I can't live without. It's not something that I have to have. It's just kind of there. Oh, and I also forgot to mention Siri. Well, it's probably because I just don't use Siri. I just don't. I activate it on accident more than I actually want to use it. I activate it on accident more than I remember that it actually exists. I'm a Google search person. There are other things like the new home button. It's not even really a button anymore. It's pretty much a circular surface with a taptic engine underneath. So when you apply pressure to it, it gives off a vibration, giving the illusion of an actual button press. Very similar, pretty much the same thing as the trackpad on the MacBooks. At first it was kind of weird and I didn't even think I would get used to it, but I did eventually, and I actually kind of like it a lot. And now we finally have water resistance on an iPhone. Sony has had this pretty much forever. Samsung has done this in the past few years, and now the iPhone has it. So now that I feel that these two big companies have done it, everybody else pretty much should do this on their phones. Google, I'm looking at you. Now I have seen some reports of problems with water resistance on specifically the Plus model. Some people have actually had water seep into the phone. So not too sure about that. Not sure if it's a widespread issue or if it's just an isolated issue. But one of my relatives did test out the water resistance on his 7 Plus and everything worked fine after that. So I know that if I spill something on it or drop it in a pool or something like that, the phone itself should be just fine. Also, stereo speakers, yes. 2 thumbs up for that. Great job, Apple. We have the same bottom firing speaker, and the speaker up top is actually now a loudspeaker so that you can use it for media and videos and stuff like that. So now you have stereo speakers, not front facing speakers, but stereo speakers, very similar to the HTC 10. We've had front firing speakers on phones for a long time. Sony has had them in their phones, HTC has had them in their phones, and now the iPhone has stereo speakers. And this is something that Samsung can't even touch because the speakers on their phones are horrible. Next up, we got to talk about the camera, or cameras on the 7 Plus. The overall performance is great. Picture quality is top notch. Video quality is fantastic, especially since we have optical image stabilization. So when taking 4K video, it's not going to be all jittery. It's not going to be all shaky and stuff like that. It's very, very smooth. Very impressed with the video quality here on the iPhone 7 Plus. And we do have that secondary lens so that we can get really close to our subject without having to actually physically move closer and still get some really nice quality, which is nice. And then we have portrait mode, which pretty much lets you single out a specific object or subject and just completely blur out the background. It's a nice thing. Right now, it doesn't work as well as you would want it to. It is called portrait mode, so it's best when you are taking pictures of actual people. But if you're taking pictures of objects, it's probably not going to be able to work as well. But I'm pretty sure as software updates go on, this will start to get better. Now, in terms of ranking the smartphone camera, I would have to say it's arguably number 1. It's easily top 2, but it's definitely top 3. Of course, the other 2 being the Pixel and the S7 Edge. Now, all of these cameras are so good that it really just comes down to personal preference, what kind of look you're going for, what kind of results you're getting. For me, I prefer the camera on the S7 Edge, and some of my most favorite pictures have actually come from the Google Pixel, but that's not to take anything away from the iPhone's camera. Again, I really love the results that I get, super clean and natural looking. And again, 4K video is awesome on the iPhone 7 Plus. And then there's the battery life, which is probably one of my most favorite things about the 7 Plus. Now, when I had the Exynos Galaxy Note 7, rest in peace, I was getting about 6 to 7 hours of screen on time consistently with that phone. So now that that phone is gone, the iPhone 7 has now taken that number 1 spot, and it's also the most reliable battery that I've had in a phone in a very long time. And what do I mean by reliable? If I have 40% battery left and I know I need to run some errands, I need to go to a store, grab some lunch, go to another store, and then come back, I know for a fact that the iPhone will last throughout that whole entire trip, and I don't need to bring a power bank with me or anything like that. With something like the S7 Edge, which does get some really nice screen on time and I have great battery performance, it's not necessarily as reliable. Sometimes I could have battery drain out of nowhere, and sometimes I just can't gauge it. With the iPhone, if I see 40% battery life, I know for a fact that it's gonna last me throughout that whole errand run. So the iPhone 7 Plus is fantastic all across the board. It's top notch in pretty much every category, but one thing that holds me back is iOS. And it's not just the fact that I can change icon packs and use widgets on Android, it's just how iOS is handled and how I'm able to handle it. I don't really have as much control over iOS as I do over Android. And honestly, that's a whole other video for a whole other time. But when talking about a smartphone, the software is pretty much the biggest selling point, and iOS just doesn't do it for me. Now, while I was using the iPhone 7 Plus for many weeks, eventually I got used to it and I could handle it, and it was usable and it was really, really good. But then when I pulled out my Nexus 6P, I started to get a little homesick, and I realized, yep, this is why I prefer Android. So overall, no hate towards the iPhone at all. In fact, pound for pound, all things considered, as of right now, because of the Note 7, the iPhone 7 Plus is arguably the best phone on the market. Now again, this comes down to personal preference. Personally, I prefer the Google Pixel. What? I know a lot of people are gonna look at me like I have two heads for saying that. And then there's gonna be another group of people out there that think that I forgot about the LG V20 and the Galaxy S7 Edge. But with all things considered, iOS is pretty much the only thing holding me back. I don't really have the control that I feel that I need. And honestly, that's not a bad thing. You just need to open up apps and use them, right? But again, there's more into using a phone as a power user than just the applications. Now, before I end the video, I'm gonna go ahead and assume that there are already a few comments down there mentioning the headphone jack, or the lack thereof. Now, I didn't forget to mention it until now. I just wanted to hold off and see how many people actually remembered that there's no headphone jack, and to see how many people forgot that there's no headphone jack. Now, when we saw that Apple says no headphone jack on the iPhone 7, a lot of people said, oh my goodness, what is happening? We need to plug our headphones in here. We need to plug in our aux cord in our cars into our phones. Oh, what happens if you need to charge your phone and listen to music at the same time? What? All right, I will admit I was really confused with Apple removing the headphone jack. And in all honesty, there are some times where I actually need to plug in some headphones into my phone. But for me personally, I never really had to charge my phone and listen to music at the same time. That's just weird. But I will be sensitive to the fact that there are people out there like that, so yeah. But I'm just not ready for dongle life yet. I honestly didn't miss the headphone jack as much as I thought I would, but there were some times where I did want to plug in some headphones or connect it to my car, but I just couldn't. So that pretty much does it for the video, guys. I really like the iPhone 7 Plus, but iOS just holds me back. But that does not take away from the fact that it is arguably the best phone on the market right now. Arguably, pound for pound, you have to consider everything. That's all up to you. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let me know if I should continue this series. I actually had a lot of fun putting this one together. But anyway, that does it for me. I'll talk to you guys later, and thanks for watching.